The Dragon Story. Chapter 5. The Red Dragon. When the thunderous growl echoed through the cave, Bub dove behind Smokey, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. The baby dragon was already pressed against his mother, trembling so much that small sparks were flying from his scales like tiny fireworks. Only G-Dad remained standing, his flashlight beam barely piercing the pitch-black darkness ahead. The light seemed to be swallowed whole by the gloom, revealing nothing but endless shadows and glistening cave walls that somehow made the darkness feel even deeper. Drip, drip, drip. The sound of water echoing through the cave was the only noise for what felt like an eternity. The heavy footsteps had stopped, but the silence was almost worse than the noise. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Bub counted the seconds in his head, reaching almost 300 before anything happened. The air grew thick with the smell of smoke and something else, something ancient and wild. Then the ground began to shake again. Boom! 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 Each step was like a small earthquake, making loose rocks scatter across the cave floor and stalactites break and fall from above them. Whatever was making these footsteps had to be enormous. Bub thought at least twice the size of Smokey's mom, maybe even bigger. His mind raced with several terrifying questions. Was this what had attacked Smokey's mom? Was it big enough to eat them in 3 bites, or even just swallow them whole? Hot, heavy breathing filled the cave, like massive bellows pumping hot air onto a flame. The sound grew louder and louder, and with what sounded like the scraping of claws on the cavern bed. Each breath sent warm air rushing past them, carrying the scent of charcoal and brimstone. Then it looked like small flames were flickering in the darkness. But was that from the beast's breath, or was it its eyes? "Granddad," Bub whispered, his voice trembling. "We've got to get out of here. Whatever's coming could eat us." His legs felt like jelly, and he wanted to get out of there, as fast as he could. G-Dad stood still for a moment, his knuckles white on the flashlight. Then he whispered back to Bub, "Okay. On the count of 3. He paused for a second, then said, 1. His voice barely audible above the trembling of the ground and the breath blowing past them. 2. It was getting closer. Then 3! He shouted, spinning around and shooting for the entrance to the cave. Both he and Bub burst out of the cave like rockets, sprinting as fast as they could, with Smokey right behind them. Running as fast as they could, right into the woods, away from the cave, racing by trees so fast, being sure not to run into one or get tripped by a branch. 50 yards, then 100, then 200. They just kept running until they couldn't run anymore. Their lungs completely filled, not able to gulp as much air as they needed to run harder. Finally they stopped, doubled over, gasping for air, their legs shaking from running so hard. Finally, after a few minutes they looked up, thinking they were out of harm's way because they didn't hear anything behind them. No breathing and no footsteps that rocked the ground. But then it wasn't until they looked up after catching their breath that they realized Smokey's mother hadn't followed. She had stayed behind. Why would she stay behind? To face the beast? To stop it from following them? To protect her son? But why? Oh no, both Granddad and Bub thought. This isn't good. What is happening to her? Once Smokey realized that his mother hadn't followed them too, he let out a heart-wrenching screech. "Mom!" he seemed to cry, his 2 golden eyes filled with fear as he stared back toward the cave. Small flames sparked from his nostrils, and then he was off. Before G-Dad could stop him, Smokey turned and had started sprinting back to the cave, his tail leaving a trail of sparks on the ground. "No! Smokey, stop!" G-Dad yelled, now huffing and puffing again. "We don't know what it is," he yelled. Bub, not wanting to be left alone in the woods for fear of something else there that would also eat him, he ran after them both, with his heavy winter jacket making him feel like he was running through water. Suddenly a piercing screech split the air. Smokey's mother, then another. The sound echoed through the trees and off the mountainside, making it seem like it was coming from everywhere all at once. Smokey skidded to a stop, and G-Dad and Bub nearly crashed into him and one another. They stood frozen, looking in the direction of the cave. What was that? They all wondered. Then what happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion like a dream, or a nightmare. The mother dragon shot straight up into the sky from the mouth of the cave and straight up from the trees. her wings beating with such incredible power, sending snow swirling in all directions. But then right behind came something that made Bub and his granddad immediately worried. Another dragon! But one twice her size, with scales the color of burning embers, and eyes like blazing coals. Its massive tail, with large black spikes, whipped through the air as he chased after her, letting out another roar that shook snow from all the trees and echoed across the mountain valley, scaring all the little creatures which went running for their dear lives. The red dragon was gaining on her, its enormous wings cutting through the air like blades. He was just too powerful and too fast. He was getting closer and closer and closer. She deepened her strength trying to outrace him, but to no avail. He too quickened his pace and deepened his strength, and with each beat of his wings was getting faster and faster. The distance between them was rapidly closing. 150 yards, 100 yards, 50 yards. Bub didn't want to watch what was about to happen, but he also couldn't take his eyes off of what was about to happen. Even from a distance, Bub could see the terror in her eyes as she tried to push herself faster, her wings beating frantically against the winter air. But just then, as the huge, mighty red dragon was about to catch her tail, out of nowhere came an enormous black shape, like a thunderbolt, right out of the clouds past the mother dragon, and bam! The big black beast slammed into the big red dragon and sent it falling just as quickly down toward the ground as it was flying up into the air. The two dragons then grabbed onto each other, wrapping their arms and legs around each other with their claws. And then the black dragon spread his wings wide to stop the falling, blocking out the sun, and then unleashed a blast of flame directly into the red dragon's face. The fire was so intense it turned the snow on the red dragon into steam. The red dragon shrieked in pain as the black dragon's claws dug into its chest, leaving deep gouges in its gleaming scales. With a mighty roar that seemed to shake the entire mountain, the two dragons flipped each other over and hurled each other toward the ground like a meteor. As they were falling, the immense black dragon turned to look at the mother dragon, who had stopped mid-flight, and at that very moment, Bub and his granddad knew that this had to be Smokey's dad. But the battle wasn't over. The red dragon released himself from the claws of Smokey's dad and quickly stopped its fall with the single swoosh of his wings and shot right back up toward Smokey's father. The two massive creatures sped up and charged toward each other at full speed, like missiles on a collision course. The air was moving back and forth and swirling with the speed of the two beasts flying right at each other. Bub didn't want to watch, but couldn't look away. Beside him, Smokey was trembling and afraid, worried to see what would happen to his father. And then